I used to believe there were two kinds of neighbors, the ones you wave at and the ones you tolerate. I was 32, newly divorced, and renting half a duplex in a suburb that looked tidy from a distance. I wanted quiet. I wanted predictable. I wanted to feel like my life was still under my control, even if it was held together with grocery store coffee and late-night spreadsheets. Next door lived Mrs. Haskins. Everyone called her Mrs., even though I later learned she'd been widowed for years and didn't care about titles. She was in her late 60s then, maybe early 70s, with a compact body that looked built from stubbornness. She wore sun hats that belonged in a different decade, kept wind chimes on the porch, and talked to her plants as if they were children who disappointed her. The first time I saw her, she was kneeling in the strip of dirt between our driveways, pulling weeds like she was extracting secrets. I nodded, polite. She looked up, smiled, and said, "You'll want to keep an eye on the gutter. This place likes to flood." I had a 5-year-old son, Ben, who still believed the world was generally kind. He was small for his age and careful, the way some kids are when they've watched adults fall apart. I tried to keep the divorce from staining him, but children notice everything. He'd ask questions in the back seat, in the bath, at bedtime. I answered in soft sentences that left out the jagged edges. Mrs. Haskins noticed him right away, not in the nosy way I feared, but in a steady, watchful way. She'd leave a chalk drawing on the sidewalk near our steps. A rocket ship, a dinosaur, a lopsided heart. She'd wave when he came home from kindergarten and say, "How was the big world today?" Ben liked her. That should have been enough to make me like her too. Instead, it made me wary. I didn't want him attaching himself to another adult. I didn't want anyone thinking they had a claim on us. I told myself I was being protective. Really, I was being proud. The critical moment happened on a Saturday in August, the kind of hot day that makes everything smell like warmed plastic and cut grass. I was cooking lunch, distracted, thinking about bills. Ben was at the kitchen table with a handful of grapes. I heard him cough once, then again harder. I glanced over and saw his face go red, his little hands fluttering at his throat in a way that didn't match a normal cough. For a split second, my mind refused to accept it. It tried to turn it into something ordinary. Then he made a sound I still hear sometimes at night, a strangled, airless rasp. I dropped what I was holding and grabbed him. I slapped his back the way you do when you're guessing and praying. Nothing. His eyes were wide, wet, panicked. I yanked open the back door to scream for help, because screaming felt like doing something. Mrs. Haskins was in her yard. She looked up, saw my face, and ran without hesitation. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't offer comfort. She came straight in, her shoes tracking dirt across my kitchen floor, and she took Ben from my arms as if she'd practiced for this her whole life. She positioned him firm and calm, and delivered the kind of precise thrusts you see in diagrams. I remember her jaw clenched, her eyes focused. On the third thrust, a grape shot out, bouncing across the linoleum like a small, stupid bead. Ben gulped air and started sobbing. I slid down the cabinet and cried too, loud and humiliating, my hands shaking so hard I couldn't wipe my face. Mrs. Haskins didn't say, "It's okay." She just rubbed Ben's back and said, "Breathe, kiddo. That's it. Stay with me." After, I couldn't stop thanking her. My gratitude came out frantic, like I could pay off terror with words. She waved it away. She made me sit. She made Ben sip water. She checked his breathing like she knew what she was doing, because she did. "I was a nurse," she said when I finally asked. "Long time ago. Doesn't leave you." I wanted to hug her, but I didn't. I didn't know how to accept help without feeling exposed. Instead, I offered money because money is what people like me use to turn a debt into a transaction. She stared at me with a look that wasn't harsh, just plain. "No," she said. "You don't owe me. Just don't leave grapes alone with him again." That night, after Ben fell asleep, I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to name what I felt. Gratitude was part of it. Fear was part of it. But underneath was something uglier. Embarrassment. I'd been helpless. I needed her. And needing her meant she'd seen me at my worst. Panicked, messy, not in charge. In the morning, I brought her banana bread with a thank you card. She smiled and accepted it. Then she went back to her yard like nothing had happened. I told myself the moment was over, sealed. I told myself it would stay private. A few weeks later, the neighborhood held one of those end-of-summer block gatherings. Someone set up folding tables. People brought pasta salad and watermelon. Kids ran between sprinklers. The adults clustered in circles like schools of fish, trading small talk that felt like currency. I was desperate to belong. Divorce had moved me into a category I didn't know how to carry. I didn't have we anymore. I had me, and me felt like a weak offering. Mrs. Haskins showed up late, carrying a plate of deviled eggs. She wore a sun hat with a ridiculous flower on it. She set the eggs down and started talking to a woman about tomatoes, animated, hands moving. She looked happy in a way that irritated me. A man from down the street, Rob, loud and shiny and always talking about property values, leaned toward me and nodded at her. "That one's a character," he said. "You're next door, right?" I should have said, "She saved my son." I should have said, "She's a retired nurse and she's kind." I should have said anything that matched the truth. Instead, I laughed. I said, "Yeah, she's intense. Always in my business. The wind chimes drive me nuts." It was a small lie shaped to fit in a stranger's hand. Rob chuckled, and relief washed through me, warm and immediate. The group leaned closer, hungry for a shared target. Someone joked about her cat lady vibe. Someone mimicked her voice. And I, who owed her my son's breath, added a comment about her talking to plants like they were people. They laughed. I felt included. That was the first time I betrayed her on purpose. Once you do something like that, you have to keep doing it because stopping means admitting what you did. The gossip became a habit. It was easier than honesty. It kept me safely aligned with the group that felt like it mattered. I started noticing things about Mrs. Haskins the way people do when they've decided someone is odd. Her mismatched curtains, the way she sometimes wore her hair unbrushed, the way she spoke sharply to delivery drivers if they blocked her mailbox. Every trait became evidence. When new neighbors moved in and asked what she was like, I didn't mention grapes and breath and steady hands. I said, "Oh, she's harmless, just quirky," in a tone that made harmless sound like pathetic. It wasn't cruelty in a dramatic sense. I didn't spray paint her door or steal her mail. It was worse in its ordinariness. It was social erosion. Little comments that made people roll their eyes when she spoke. Little jokes that made it easier to dismiss her. One evening, Ben was drawing at the table and said, "Mrs. Haskins is nice." I felt a sharp discomfort, like a splinter under my nail. "She can be," I said too quickly, "but she's different. You don't have to talk to her so much." Ben looked down at his paper. "She gave me a sticker." I remember thinking, absurdly, that a sticker was a threat. The first major collision came at the HOA meeting. I didn't even want to go, but Rob convinced me it was important. "You're a homeowner now," he said, even though I was still renting. "It matters." The agenda included yard maintenance concerns. Mrs. Haskins sat in the folding chair near the front, hands folded in her lap, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Rob stood and started talking about eyesores and standards. Then he mentioned Mrs. Haskins by name. He said her yard was uncontrolled. He said her wind chimes were disturbing. He said there were reports of her approaching children. That last part made my stomach twist. I knew she approached children. She approached mine with chalk drawings and stickers and questions about kindergarten. She approached him the way an older person with no grandchildren sometimes does, with attention. Rob looked around the room. "We need to think about safety," he said, and the word safety hit people like a drum. Someone asked for examples. The room hummed. Rob glanced at me, and I felt a terrible, familiar relief at being invited into the circle. I cleared my throat and said, "She's been a little inappropriate with Ben. Nothing big, just hovering." It wasn't true, not in the way I made it sound. But the words landed, and I watched faces shift. Mrs. Haskins looked at me, not with outrage, with recognition. like she was watching the exact moment I stepped away from something decent. After the meeting, she stopped me in the hallway. "You could have told them," she said quietly. "Told them what?" I asked, even though I knew. "That I helped you," she said. "That I'm not what they're making me." I folded my arms, defensive. "I didn't ask you to," I said, the ugliest sentence I've ever spoken. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she nodded once, as if confirming something. "No," she said, "you didn't." A month later, an inspection notice went up on her door. Then another. She started getting letters about violations. Rob told people she'd been warned for years, which wasn't true. It was just easier to say it had always been this way. I saw her less. Her porch light stayed off more often. The wind chimes disappeared. One afternoon I found a small bag on my steps. A children's book about fire trucks and a note in neat handwriting. It said, "For Ben. He likes the pictures." No signature, just that. I held the book and felt something stir that I didn't want. It would have been simpler if she'd hated me. Kindness after betrayal is a mirror you can't easily look away from. I didn't give the book to Ben right away. I hid it in a drawer for weeks, as if withholding it could also withhold the feeling it created in me. Then winter came and the duplex owner decided to sell. The rent went up. I couldn't afford it. Within 2 months, Ben and I were packing boxes. The last day, I saw Mrs. Haskins outside, watching a moving truck back down the driveway. She stood with her hands in her coat pockets, face unreadable. I told myself to walk over and say something. I told myself to apologize. I told myself I'd do it when the truck was loaded, when things were calmer. Instead, I waved. A small, safe gesture. She didn't wave back. As we pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw her still standing there, shrinking with distance. I thought, with a strange relief, that the past was now buried under miles and new addresses. Life moved on. It always does, which is part of its cruelty. I remarried in my late 30s. We bought a house in a different district. Ben grew into a teenager with longer limbs and a quieter sadness. He stopped talking about stickers and started talking about cars. When Mrs. Haskins appeared in my mind, it was like an old photo in a drawer. Something you notice while looking for something else. I feel a pinch of shame, then close the drawer. I told myself it had been complicated. I told myself I had been under stress. I told myself the neighborhood dynamics weren't my fault. I told myself she'd be fine. She was tough. People like her always land on their feet. The moment with the grape became a story I told at parenting groups sometimes, edited to make me look competent. My neighbor was a nurse and she helped, thank God. I never said what I did after. I never said her name. It's strange how easily we turn someone into a footnote when they don't fit the version of ourselves we prefer. The second major collision arrived through Ben years later, on a Sunday night when he came home from college looking hollow. He sat at the kitchen island and kept turning his phone over like it was too hot to hold. "There's something going on," he said finally, "with the campus clinic." He'd been seeing a counselor for anxiety. He didn't call it that at first. He called it sleep issues and stress. I was proud of him for going at all. Men in my family didn't ask for help. They swallowed it until it turned into other problems. Ben said the clinic's mental health program was being reviewed. Staff were being cut. Patients were being transferred. He was afraid he'd lose his counselor right when finals were coming. My husband said, "That's awful," and started talking about budgets and politics. I listened with my mind half elsewhere, because Ben had used a specific phrase, program review. 2 days later, my company announced a partnership with a regional health network to consult on program efficiency. My team was asked to attend meetings with clinic directors. I was a middle manager in compliance. Not powerful, but present. I sat in a conference room with a tray of stale pastries and listened to people discuss which services were duplicative, which populations were high risk, which line items were unsustainable. On a printed agenda, I saw a name. Haskins, M. RN, Rhett, patient advocate. My breath caught so hard I had to swallow to hide it. I told myself it couldn't be the same person. Haskins is not rare. RN could be anyone. My mind tried to protect me with coincidence. Then she walked into the room. She was older, of course. Her hair was white now, cut short. The stubborn compactness was still there. The sun hat was gone, replaced by a plain cardigan and sensible shoes. She carried a folder against her chest like armor. For a second, she didn't look at me. She spoke to the director in a calm, firm voice about patient continuity and the cost of disruption. She wasn't loud. She didn't perform. She just stated facts like she expected them to matter. Then her eyes moved across the table and landed on me. Recognition passed over her face, quick and restrained. No surprise, no drama, just the smallest tightening around the mouth like a scar being pressed. The room kept talking. People kept flipping pages. I sat frozen, hearing only the blood in my ears. I had believed the past was buried. Here it was, alive, carrying a folder, invited into my present by the same systems I'd spent years working inside. After the meeting, I followed her into the hallway. My legs felt numb. "Mrs. Haskins," I said. She turned. "Hello," she replied, as if we were acquaintances at the grocery store. "It's me," I said foolishly. "I know," she said. I wanted to apologize immediately, to spill everything out and hope remorse could act like a solvent. But there were people around, and I had built my adult life on appearing composed. So I said, "I didn't know you worked here." "I don't," she said. "Not exactly. I volunteer. Advocate work. I do what I can." Her tone held no bitterness. That made it worse. Bitterness would have let me argue. Calmness left me alone with myself. I started, then stopped. She looked at me for a long moment. "How's your boy?" she asked. The question landed like a weight. She remembered him. She remembered breath and grapes. She remembered more than I'd allowed myself to remember. "He's struggling," I admitted. "With anxiety. He uses the clinic." Something shifted in her eyes, a softer thing. Then it hardened again into practicality. "Then you should be here," she said, gesturing toward the meeting room. "And you should listen. These are not numbers." "I am listening," I said, too defensively. She nodded slightly. "Good," she said. "You didn't listen then." The third plot turn was realizing she wasn't here by chance. And she wasn't here for me either. She was here for people like my son. The universe hadn't arranged this meeting for my growth. It had simply placed me in the path of consequences. In the weeks that followed, I tried to keep my distance. I told myself professionalism required it. Really, I was afraid of what I'd feel if I got close enough to her again. But the project continued. Meetings multiplied. Emails stacked. Decisions were made in small increments that felt harmless until you saw their shape. Ben's counselor called him to say her hours were being cut. He would be assigned to someone else. Ben told me this in a flat voice that made my chest ache. I found myself speaking up in meetings in ways I hadn't before, asking questions about wait times and transfer plans. A director smiled tightly and said, "We appreciate your concern." Concern. As if concern were a personality trait, not a debt. One afternoon, as people filed out, Mrs. Haskins approached me. "You have influence," she said quietly. "I'm not senior," I said. "You are in the room," she said. "That's influence." Then she did something I didn't expect. She handed me a photocopied page from an old report. "This is what happens," she said, "when you treat people like they're inconvenient." The page showed statistics, dropout rates, hospitalization rates, suicide attempt rates. Dry numbers on paper. But as I held it, I saw Ben's face at 5, panicked, airless. I saw my own face, helpless. I saw her hands, steady. I realized, sickly, that my cruelty toward her hadn't been separate from this. I had once helped make a person easier to dismiss. Now my son was the kind of person dismissed by systems that find it convenient. That was karma with no magic in it. Just patterns. The fourth collision came through my own mouth. At a dinner with coworkers, someone joked about the frequent flyers who used mental health services, the way people do when they've been around suffering too long and need distance. Laughter rose. Familiar, warm, easy. I felt that old temptation, the same one at the block party years before. Join in, be safe, be included. I opened my mouth and, for a fraction of a second, almost said something slick, almost performed that version of myself who survives by throwing someone else under the bus. Then I saw Mrs. Haskins in my mind, standing in a hallway, saying, "You didn't listen then. I didn't make the joke." But I also didn't challenge the room as strongly as I should have. I said something mild about being careful. The conversation rolled on. My restraint was not courage. It was a compromise that kept me comfortable. Later that night, alone, I cried in the bathroom with the fan on, like I was trying to hide the sound from myself. I wasn't crying because I'd finally become good. I was crying because I could see the shape of my own cowardice clearly now, and I couldn't unsee it. I emailed Ben's counselor asking for resources. I emailed the director with more questions. I did what a person does when trying to feel less guilty. I produced activity. None of it erased what I'd done. The program cuts happened anyway, softened at the edges by policy language. Ben got reassigned to a new counselor he didn't connect with. He started missing appointments. His grades slipped. He called me less. When he did call, his voice sounded older, heavier, as if he'd learned something about endurance I wished he didn't have to learn. At the final project meeting, Mrs. Haskins spoke once, calmly, about continuity and dignity. Then she gathered her papers and left. I followed her outside into the parking lot, where the air smelled like exhaust and late summer. "I owe you an apology," I said finally. My voice sounded thin. She stopped and faced me. "I know," she said. I tried to explain. I tried to summon the right combination of honesty and excuse. I was scared. I wanted to fit in. I didn't think. She raised a hand, not unkindly, but firmly. "I'm not your confession booth," she said. "I'm not your clean slate." The words stung because they were true. I had wanted her to receive my apology so I could feel lighter. That wasn't about her. That was about me. She looked past me toward the building. "People make small choices," she said. "They think small means it doesn't count. Then one day the small choices are a path behind them, and they wonder why they can't get back." I swallowed. "Did I ruin your life?" I asked because I needed to know how much damage I'd caused. She considered. "You didn't ruin it," she said. "Life is bigger than one neighbor, but you helped make it harder. You helped teach people how to look away." She started walking again. I stood there, heat pressing down, watching her move toward her car with the same compact stubbornness I'd mocked years ago. She opened the door, paused, and added without turning, "And you're still doing it, in nicer clothes." I went home to a quiet house and a son who wasn't there. I sat at the kitchen table with paperwork and emails and the old, familiar urge to turn discomfort into something manageable. Outside, a neighbor's wind chimes rang in a thin, bright pattern. I understood then that there was no dramatic punishment coming, no moment where balance was restored. There was only the slow, ordinary consequence of being the person I had practiced being. Some debts don't demand interest right away. They just satug you.